Kath T. Hi Chris, thanks for your great videos. I'd be interested in hearing more specifics about how you got into critical thinking. You said that you started reading Carl Sagan, but I'd be interested in the moment, if you remember it, that you began to know that you lacked critical thinking skills or weren't using them. Did you read a blog post somewhere where someone mentioned that they had learned to think critically by reading authors such as Carl Sagan? Did you go to a lecture where someone talked about the need to develop critical thinking, or what? Thanks. Yeah, I'll tell you exactly the moment it happened. I was actually, I think it was August of 2013, and I was sitting at my computer, and I had decided that, having read all this information about Scientology and knowing that it was now something I could no longer believe in, and I couldn't follow anymore because I learned that Hubbard was a pathological liar and a serial plagiarist and had just, that Scientology was not at all what it said it was. I knew that I was no longer part of this destructive cult mentality. And I told myself, I do not want to go from one cult into another. I don't want to, but I have to decide, what am I going to believe? What am I going to think? How am I going to approach life now? I don't believe in Thetans anymore. I don't believe that, do I believe we're immortal spiritual beings? What about psychiatry? What about homosexuality? What about these really strong issues that Scientology makes? What about those things? I have to reevaluate all of this. And it was very, everything was kind of up in the air. And I get on the internet, and exactly what happened was, I saw, I think I looked under skepticism. Somehow skepticism had come across my plate. Maybe along the line, maybe when I was reading about Scientology, somebody said something about skepticism or had used the phrase critical thinking. And I didn't really understand what that was, right? So I Googled skepticism. And what came up was skeptic.com and a video from Penn and Teller. Now, I didn't know anything about Penn and Teller or James Randi or Carl Sagan or the skeptical movement or the atheists or Richard Dawkins or any of this stuff. I didn't know about any of it. But I knew who Penn and Teller was because they were magicians and they were funny, and I'd laughed at them in the past because I'd seen their performances and I really liked them. And I went, Penn and Teller skepticism? What is this? And I did, because I had never connected those two magicians with skepticism or logic or reason. So I looked at the video, and it was Penn Jillette talking about James Randi. Never heard of James Randi. So I looked up James Randi. And James Randi is this very famous skeptic who had been a magician who was talking about critical thinking, and he badmouthed Hubbard, and he badmouthed psychics and ESP, and I read about the James Randi $1 Million Challenge, and I was just fascinated by this. I thought this was fascinating, and there was a quote from Carl Sagan about belief and about science, and I started reading what Carl Sagan had to say about science and how science is not a system of belief, and science is not just the scientific method. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of looking at information and making determinations and judgments on that information based on the scientific method. And what I came across right away with Carl Sagan was something called the baloney detection kit. And this was a chapter in the book, The Demon Haunted World. Science as a light or a candle in the darkness of ignorance, right? This is the name of this book. Never heard of it before. I knew about Carl Sagan from Cosmos, billions and billions of stars. That was all I knew about Carl Sagan. And suddenly, I'm reading these quotes from him, and this baloney detection kit. I read the steps of this baloney detection kit, and I thought, holy shit, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because it's not another cult system. It's not somebody telling me how the world is or what to think. It's giving me tools I can use to evaluate for myself what to think. And I loved that. And so it was perfect timing to run into that. So I bought The Demon Haunted World, and I read it. and it was probably one of the best books I've ever read. Laughed a lot of the way through it. Of course, related everything to Scientology. And of course, if I read it now, I'd probably get a whole lot more out of it. But at the time, it was really, really good for stripping out a lot of stuff that Scientology had given me, or that Hubbard had laid in, that were sort of landmines against critical thinking. And Sagan breaks it all down, and he's a brilliant writer. And so that's what set me on the road to critical thinking and made me feel like this was a subject I needed to know a lot more about. This was a subject I wanted to get behind. And the whole field of skepticism and critical thinking were something that I could embrace and use to rid myself of all of the destructive cult landmines that Hubbard had planted all around in my brain. And I've been using that ever since, much to my benefit.